powerful line we say in the Kinnah. Page 155, I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. And this echoes the pasuk we read last night in Eicha, where Yirmiyah says, Tzipinu el goy lo yoshia. We were yearning, we were hoping for the nation that would come in and save us, but they never did. And that's a reference to the Egyptians. We know that during the onslaught of the Babylonians, during the first temple, there was one point where the Egyptian army came in and they were able to push back the Babylonians at least for a time. So when the Babylonians were again coming closer to destroying the Beis HaMikdash, Tzipinu el lo yoshia, we were hoping that maybe the Egyptians would come again and save us, or maybe some other army or some other country. But it never happened. I think throughout our history, one thing to keep in mind in this particular Kinnah, and I'd like to, as we go along for each one, to at least walk away with one hashkafa, or one halacha, one clear take-home message from every Kinnah. And I think one message from Kinnah number 6 is that we cannot rely on other people, on other nations. We've seen this throughout our history. We've seen this in contemporary times. Famous speech of the Klausenberger Rebbe of the Yom Kippur of 1945 in the DP camp. This is when, at that time, the General Dwight Eisenhower came to visit. And the Rebbe got up and he put a tallis over his head. And he was giving a speech about some of his own experiences during the war. And he said, although he was warned not to, he didn't care. He said, the Americans and England share in the guilt along with Hitler, because the Americans knew for at least several years what was happening in the death camps, and they had the ability to bomb the railway lines leading to Auschwitz. They could have bombed the places where Jews were being murdered. 1 million Jews could have been saved, he screamed out, including the Jews from Hungary, who were only taken later on in the war. If the Americans had intervened just a little bit earlier, it would not have happened the same way it did. He was speaking Yiddish, obviously, and Eisenhower didn't understand Yiddish, but he had Lieutenant Mayor Birnbaum, who was a young Orthodox soldier from America. Many of you have heard of him before. So he was the official interpreter of the general. And the story goes, as the translation was being said, Eisenhower had tears in his eyes when the Rebbe finished. Even the not accepting people into the United States, not accepting people to England, this is something that if things would have been a little bit different, obviously everything is b'hashkacha, everything is with the Yad Hashem, but millions of lives could have been saved. Roosevelt himself, although he was loved by the Jews at the time, he was very afraid to allow any refugees in. He was afraid they might be spies and that could be a serious threat to national security. In the past, when we've read this line together, I've often quoted some of the reactions or the resolutions of the UN. We know this past year things have been a lot different with the UN. And Baruch Hashem, we saw on May 14th, 70 years after Israel was declared a Jewish state, the U.S. Embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Yerushalayim, and that was indeed a celebration. But it also makes me a little bit nervous when you hear people speaking about how the administration is embracing Israel and it's very pro-Jewish. You have to keep in mind the words of the Kinnah, Kurasi l'ma'avai heima ribuni. I called out to my lovers and they deceived me. I think the take-home message here is, in the words of Reb Chaim Vital, that in the last Gullus, and he's referring to the Gullus of Yishmael, he writes that in the end of times there's going to be a Gullus Yishmael she'asidin lahotzer es Yisrael tsaros koshos, that will experience very difficult pain, lo noro kamosam, things that we've never seen before. And we will not know what to do, and the answer is not relying on any particular administration. Zulasi sheniftach bekocho agadol yisbarach sheoshienu miyadam. The only hope we have, writes Reb Chaim Vital, and therefore the thing we have to focus on is the realization that there's nothing else in the world besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's been there with us throughout history, and we yearn and we have bitachon for him to save us from this present galus. Kinna number 6. Start the 7th kinna on page 159. The refrain of this kinna is Zachar Hashem ma haya lanu. Remember Hashem, what has happened to us. It's obviously a very strange thing to say, to ask Hashem to remember what has taken place. Obviously, Kadosh Baruch Hu is outside of time and space. So what exactly are we asking throughout the entire kinna? Remember Hashem, what has happened to us. So the pasuk tells us at the end of the flood, V'yizker Elokim es Noach, that Hashem remembered Noach and all of the animals that were with him in the Teva. V'yashoku hamoyim, and the waters began to subside. So Rashi is explaining, what does it mean that Hashem remembered Noach? Zeh Hashem midas hadin, v'yizker Elokim, the word Elokim is the reference to the attribute of justice. V'nefcha l'midas rachamim al yedei tfilas tzadikim, but that was transformed into the attribute of compassion through the tefillah of the tzaddikim. David HaMelech writes in Tehillim, Zechor rachamecha, remember your compassion, v'chasidecha, and your kindness, Hashem, ki me'olam heima, they are forever. What is David asking from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Mevakesh rachama v'chasidav. We ask for your rachamim, we ask for your compassion. Don't look at us through the lens of din, through the eyes of justice, but pour on that love. So during this kinna, every time we say, Zachor Hashem mahayolanu, we're not asking Hashem to remember what has taken place. We're asking Hashem to please act out of the rachamim that we've seen enough, we've experienced enough, and therefore we ask for a gula. See, oftentimes we think in big picture problems, people dying, massive tragedies. But to have in mind, Zachor Hashem, it's not just the Holocaust, not just, you can't even say the word just, with millions of Jews being slaughtered. But it's so many little things that we never even think about. So many psychological challenges that we have, that our children have. I saw recently, there was a whole article of children growing up in Israel. So on one hand, living outside of Israel, Baruch Hashem, we have the state, we have our government. It's not 100% what the Torah would like, but Baruch Hashem, we have Eretz Yisrael. To realize there are millions of children suffering from post-traumatic stress because all of the sirens that they go through every year, those living near Gaza, even more so. I want to read to you something from a nurse. She works in a hospital in Ashkelon. And she's describing one direct hit that she went through. This is number 14. Everything went dark and I was covered in dust, and for a moment I thought the computer had exploded. Then I heard Nir screaming, "Mommy!" but couldn't hear Lior and couldn't stand. It was as if my brain was disconnected from my body. I crawled to find Lior. I found her hand, grabbed it and dragged her out of the rubble and broken metal from the roof. Nir was still standing in the hallway and had managed to push the door to the bedroom so it was open a crack. I followed the light to the hallway and found him there. I hadn't realized that my face was covered in blood pouring from my head injuries until I saw Nir's reaction. He stopped breathing out of fright. I carried him and Lior downstairs. It seemed like an eternity, but it must have been only a few seconds. My 10-year-old Yitzchak is afraid to be in the bathroom alone, and Nir has been wetting his bed ever since the attack. His hearing has been affected, and we go to the hospital for checkups, and we see a child psychologist. But it's difficult to move forward as every warning siren brings back fears and stress. Little things you might not think of. Children trying just to be normal. Many children throughout the entire Eretz Yisrael are plagued with sleeping disorders, aggression, flashbacks, numbness, cognitive detachment, depression. There was a 15-year-old girl who was interviewed in 2009. Her name is Tammy. And she said, she lives in Sderot. When the rocket started, I didn't understand because I was young, and I laughed when I heard the red alert. But when I understood, I started to scream and cry because I knew I could die any moment. My sister Caroline is 8, and she's also used to it now like me. But my brother Sasha is 5, and he still can't talk. His fear of the missile attacks has slowed his development. We don't have enough money to leave Sderot, but even if we did, where would we go? Now all of Israel is in range of rockets from the north and the south. You look at the bottom of page 5, there's an image here, comes from the New York Times, that in 2001, the range of attacks from missiles coming from Gaza was 1.5 kilometers. So unless you were living right by the border, you were pretty much safe. Fast forward to 2014, and now they have Syrian-made and funded by Iran, Baruch Hashem, for the Obama administration, giving them $1.5 billion to do wonderful things with. And they have missiles that could reach any point in Eretz Yisrael from the farthest north to the farthest south. You think of our own children growing up here in America, and we almost become callous to it. But they have lockdown drills. drills where the school tries their best to make it seem not that scary, but what are you preparing for? You're preparing for a deranged lunatic to come in and try to kill innocent children. And that's what's on your mind. You speak to people growing up in the 60s when they had to do the drop and going under the desk out of fear for Russia nuking America. What kind of trauma does that leave on a person? So Zachar Hashem, Mahayalanu, it's not just the big things, but it's all of the little things. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, we ask you, remember that we're your children. We daven. We want people to be normal, healthy, and happy. Page 158. We go to Kinna number 11. It's on page 182. Yekona and Yirmiyahu al Yoshiyahu. We've been through the history of this Kinna before, just to get the basic scope of the kings, Chizkiah, who was a very righteous king, and he reigned for many years. He was afraid to have a child because he knew, based on prophecy, that his child would not follow in his ways, but he was encouraged by Yeshaya that you have to do what you have to do. You have a mitzvah to procreate. Whatever Kadosh Baruch Hu has in mind, that's his cheshbon. He has a son, Menashe, who is Melech Yisrael. He's the king over all of Israel for many years and really brings down the entire kingdom, instituting avodah zarah, idolatry within all aspects of Jewish life. Eventually, Menashe's son reigns only for a couple years. And then we have little Yoshiyahu. He's 8 years old when he becomes king. And as the story goes, the Midrashim tell us that Chilkiyahu, the Kohen Gadol, finds a Torah that wasn't seen in many years, and it's opened up to the pasuk, curses the person who does not uphold this Torah. And hearing those words, Yoshiyahu was inspired. He says, Aleinu lahakim, then we have to do something, we have to change. I came into this position as a young man, and I felt I would kind of go with the flow. But seeing this Siman Min Hashemayim, this clear divine sign that I need to do something, I will. And he starts probably the greatest movement of tshuva throughout history. Destroying idols everywhere throughout the land of Eretz Yisrael, teaching people real Torah, bringing them back to authentic Judaism. And the pasuk tells us, "V'kamo lo hayu lefanav melech asher shovel Hashem b'chol levavo v'chol nafsho v'chol ma'odo." There has never been anybody like Yoshiyahu who had the ability to bring Klal Yisrael back in the way that he did. And the Malbim is bothered by the question that it seems like we have a very similar pasuk when it comes to Chizkiah. We're told that Chizkiah, he had bitachon like no other king before him or after him. So how could we both say for Chizkiah and Yoshiyahu that they were the greatest of all time? The Malbim says it's very simple. They're great in different areas. Chizkiah was exceptional for his bitachon. He was the king during the separation of the 10 kingdoms and the onslaught of Sennacherib. And that was his attribute. But Yoshiyahu, he was the greatest ever in being able to motivate Klal Yisrael to do tshuva. That was the unique quality of Yoshiyahu. So he was a great person and he was doing great things, but why do we have a special kinnah? Why is there a special eulogy that Yirmiyah feels that he has to share with Klal Yisrael? And we have to say it every year. What was so tragic about the death of Yoshiyahu? So the Malbim says that we have in Besorah, we have a tradition that goes back thousands of years, that as soon as the 10 tribes were exiled, at that point, it was already potential for the time of Geula. Yoshiyahu himself could have been the personality through his universal movement of tshuva to bring back Klal Yisrael and to bring on the times of redemption. So although things were spiraling down so quickly with the 50 years of Menashe, who was the Melech Yisrael, there was now a chance, there was now a hope, there was now a glimmer of light that Mashiach could be around the corner. We have the leader, he has the inspiration, and he's making progress. So the greatest tshuva movement in history, which should have brought Mashiach, what happened? So we read in the Kinnah, Lo shama lechoza leshuv acharoyim. He didn't listen to the prophet. He didn't accept the advice of Yirmiyah, who said to turn back. The Egyptians wanted to go through Eretz Yisrael to wage war, and Yoshiyahu felt that we were all on such a high level that we've eradicated the Avodah Zarah, and therefore the prophecy of no sword passing through your land should apply. And Yirmiyah told him, you don't get it. You're doing amazing things, but you haven't totally transformed people. And there is Avodah Zarah, and there are things happening behind closed doors you're just not aware of. You're very idealistic and you're looking at your success. But Yirmiyah told him, trust me, we're not at that prophecy of disallowing any sword to go through Eretz Yisrael. Lo shamu lechoza. He didn't listen to Yirmiyah. That was the downward cycle that led to his own demise and led to this hopeful era of Mashiach coming to a tragic close. We spoke about the mitzvah of sharing Torah on Shabbos. We clarified it's not sharing our Torah, but it's giving them their Torah. Where does that mitzvah come from? What's the source of having to care for our fellow Jews to make sure they have their Torah? So the Rambam tells us it comes from the mitzvah of Avas Hashem. If I really love HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I really care about His Torah, then I want to make sure that all of his children have access to the Torah. So the real fire for what we nowadays call kiruv, that comes from Avas Hashem. When you think about the kiruv movement in America and really throughout the world, it's hard not to think of Rav Noach Weinberg. Noach Weinberg is very influential in really hundreds of thousands of lives, probably throughout the world. He was a young man, and I think he was in his early 20s, and he was looking around at the state of Jewry, the assimilation and the intermarriage, and he wanted to know, what can he do to be helpful? So he decided to buy a plane ticket to travel to Eretz Yisrael to consult with the great Chazon Ish and get advice from the Chazon Ish. What can I do? How can I participate? How could I contribute? And the year was 1953. By the time he arrives in Eretz Yisrael, the Chazon Ish passed away. He passed away when Rav Noach was in journey. However, he ends up settling in Israel, he and his wife. In the 60s, he creates a little kiruv yeshiva, which was really a novelty of the time, having yeshiva made for people with little to no background. It didn't really take off. And he tried a couple different yeshivas. They all didn't take off. In 66, he starts a yeshiva called Shema Yisrael, together with some others, which was eventually named Or Sameach. But a few years later, he broke off, and he had a different vision. And this is a much longer conversation beyond the scope of our time. Different ways of trying to do kiruv. His vision was to create kiruv soldiers. You take somebody pretty much coming off the street and not knowing much at all, giving them some basic training for 5 to 6 years of learning, and then you send them out to anywhere in America or the world, and you have them try to influence others. That's a debatable approach. But the one thing that's not debatable is the love that Rav Noach had, the fire he had within him coming from an Abbas Hashem and expressing itself in loving every Jew unconditionally, regardless of where they were or what level of observance. There was an interview with Rav Shalom Kamenetsky. Rav Shalom is the son of Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. And they were asking him different ideas in the world of trying to reach out and inspire people who are little connection to Judaism. And he quoted from his father, Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. He said, always remember that you are not HaKadosh Baruch Hu's apitropis. You are not the guardian of Hashem, which means, of course, we have this mission to go out. But the way he put it is, we're not responsible for the results. We're responsible for trying and having that sense of responsibility. But we have no right to bend the Shulchan Aruch in pursuit of better results. And this is a classic hashkafa. The ends do not justify the means. And that's really what's taking place here in this kinnah to some extent. Yoshiyahu was so intoxicated by his success, he almost forgot that if you have Das Torah telling you otherwise, you have to listen to that. And he disregarded Yirmiyah. And based on that, the Tshuva movement was shut down completely. Kinnah number 11 on page 182. We're doing Kinder number 16 on page 227. It's the Kinder of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. And it's clear as we read the different stanzas, as it describes the gaiva, the arrogance of the Rishoyim going into the Beis Hamikdash and destroying it, Titus Harasha. It's clear that it was not just aggression towards the Jewish people, but it was a hatred towards God. And this is not unique to the Babylonians and their destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. The Ramban tells us in Parshas Hazinu, this is really the kernel, this is the shorish of anti-Semitism throughout all of history. Source number 22, the Ramban writes, Ba'atam ki heim osu kol haro simonu. Why is it that we've been persecuted? Why is it that so many of the nations have hated us? Lisinasa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's coming from something much deeper. It's not that we're lowly and stingy. It's not that we're too influential. It's not that we're the scum of society. It's not that we're poison. Those are all excuses. It's coming from a hatred of Hashem and a disdain of morality. Ki lo yisnu es Yisrael ba'avor she'asu avoda zora kehem. They don't hate us for doing avoda zara like they do. They hate us for not following in their ways. Ve'yavdu es HaKadosh Baruch Hu ve'yishmor mitzvosav, and for following Hashem and for trying to keep His mitzvos. V'lo yischantu behem, and not to intermarry with them. The separation that we keep from them reminds them that we follow a different path. We have a different hasaga, different aspirations of what life is. They hate that because they hate the morality we stand for, and they hate the creator of morality, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's sad, as I read this Ramban, how the non-Jewish world has hated us, in part for not becoming one with them, for not intermarrying with them. The sad thing is, nowadays we have to deal with Jews hating us for not intermarrying, for not supporting my family member who's marrying a non-Jew. We've come so far that it's not the non-Jewish world. How much time do I spend trying to help people, to coach people, how to respond to your mother as to why you're not exuberant that your sister is getting married to a non-Jew? We love all humanity, and we respect all humanity. We believe strongly that we have a mission. We're here for a purpose. So it's not just the non-Jewish world. We have Jews hating us for not intermarrying. Pope Benedict XIV, 16th, he made somewhat of a historic visit to Auschwitz. And he said the following line. He said, deep down, those vicious criminals, referring to the Nazis, by trying to wipe out this people, wanted to kill the God who called Abraham, who spoke on Sinai, and laid down principles to serve as a guide for mankind. Principles that are extremely valid. If this people, by its very existence, was a witness to the God who spoke to humanity and took us himself, then that God finally had to die, and power had to belong to man alone, to those men who thought that by force they made themselves masters of the world. So even coming from a very non-Jewish source, this is Pope Benedict XVI. If you think carefully, you're able to see through the facade. Anti-Semitism is not just because we hate Jews, but we hate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we hate the system of morality that we somehow feel subjugated to. The truth is, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, himself said this exact same thing. On the bottom of page 9, it's interesting, for every other source, I have it in the square with the name of the person who said it, but I couldn't bring myself to quote him as a name. He said, Providence has ordained that I should be the greatest liberator of humanity. I am freeing man from the restraints of an intelligence that has taken charge, from the dirty and degrading self-mortifications of a false vision called conscience and morality, and from the demands of a freedom and personal independence which only a few can bear. Hitler himself, Yamach Shemo, was very clear in his vision. I want to destroy the Jews because I want to destroy morality, because I don't think, or probably more accurately, I don't want us to feel subjugated to these ideals. As we read on in the Kinnah, we have a stirring episode which the Gemara in Gittin speaks about. They sent them away, referring to the children, to the land of Uz in 3 ships. We know the story that hundreds of young men and women were sent to Rome for immoral purposes, and they decided to jump off killing themselves in order to save themselves from a life of degradation. Probably the hardest thing to deal with is when we look back at history and we learn about the death of children. Every year I try to go through some of the tshuvas of Rav Ephraim Oshri, who was together with Rav Elchanan Wasserman. He was a young Rav in Kovna during the war, and they would come to him, as you could imagine, with the most tragic, horrific questions you could possibly think of. And not having any svarim with him, not having any way to look things up, he was a brilliant Rav, and he was able to paskin according to his, Ein L'dayin Elamasha Ein of Rose. He tried his best, and after the war, miraculously, he survived. He wrote down his tshuvas. There are many volumes where he goes through the exact questions that were posed to him and the answers he gave and the reason why he gave those particular answers. So I want to read to you one shaila without even getting into what he responded. Acharei shagarmanim arurim yimach shemam hotziu lepol b'yomim shel gimel v'daled Nisan. This was March 1944, the 3rd and 4th day of Nisan. Gathering children, that they call this the Kinder Akzen, v'heshmidu ke'elef u'masayim yeladim olin v'yomkim. Killing 1,200 children in one day. Shegozlim mechek amoseihem, that they were stolen from the laps of their mothers. Nishalti al yedei hahorim, I was asked the question by their parents, the bereft parents. Imo telis aleihem chovas amiras kaddish al yeladeihem hakatanim. Do we have the obligation to say kaddish? Vimlo, and if not, at what age? What age does a child have to die where we would be obligated to say kaddish? This is just an example of one of the thousands of questions that were posed through the Ephraim Oshri. And I think what we could take from this is that even in a time of such horrific terror You're going to ask a halachic question? Should I say Kaddish? How old? Doesn't make a difference. The fact that you have hundreds of thousands of Jews still maintaining that kesher, still wanting to know what the halacha is, that's something we have to strive for. We should never have these challenges, but to have a little bit of a hasag, of an appreciation of how much there is to grow in our bitachon, in our connection with Hashem. 2009, 2008 rather, there was the terrorist attack in Merkaz Harav. Merkaz Harav was the yeshiva established by Rav Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook. You had young men, these are high school boys, by and large, learning together Thursday night Mishmar, learning together Bahasmada Rabbah. We have Mishmar in America. We think it's neat to stay up a little bit late on Thursday night. These were boys learning till 2 in the morning every Thursday night without break. And an Arab came in with a gun, and he killed many of them. One of the fatalities was a young man, 16 years old. His name was Avram David Moshe. And I just wanted to share with you a few words that his mother wrote 1 year after his tragic passing. This is in source number 25. There are many things I've learned from you just by watching you. For example, I've seen from up close someone learn so devotedly as you. Sure, I've seen Torah learning, but never for such long, uninterrupted periods with constant concentration and devotion. You had reached a point in your learning where not only did you not lose perspective, you were nourished and refreshed from what tires most of us. And she goes on to say, it sounds like they were from a divorced family, and he was living with her most of the time and visiting his father as well. So there was always separation and letting go in her life as a mother. But then she writes, then came the ultimate letting go. One evening, through gradual understanding, through which I already knew by the time somebody actually told me, I had to let go of you completely, along with all your dreams, of my dreams for your future, your bride, your children. I wasn't ready for this. And I wasn't ready for any of the steps of letting go when they first came. But sitting in the blazing sun in the courtyard of the Merkaz Harav at your funeral, the funeral of my beloved firstborn, only 16 years old, it dawned on me that everything up until now was basic training for the letting go I had to do now. Hashem graced me with the knowledge that you had gone to the ultimate Abba house. And though I missed you terribly, you would be taken care of more perfectly than you ever had been in this world. So it is here I begin to understand faith and clinging to God. You were gone, and yet you were not. I can still be close to you by becoming closer to Hashem. For it is to him you have returned. Can you imagine writing this? Your child was killed in a terrorist attack, 16 years old, and she's able to come to that realization that I can continue coming closer to you as I become closer to Hashem. I know how much you loved me, and I know how much you love your brothers, and I think you know they loved you with great love. As much as I still need you, you don't need me. As much as I can, the energy I could expend feeling bereft, I will channel it into taking care of those precious neshamas who are still entrusted to me. So we read Kinyan number 16. I think the take-home message is twofold. We recognize evil, and anti-Semitism is not anti-Jewish, it's anti-God. And as we look throughout history, right, we should gain chizuk, we should gain that understanding that there are so many levels of bitachon we could strive for. Page 226. We're doing Kinna 21 on page 249. Saharuga Malchus. So we read on Tisha B'Av, we read on Yom Kippur, a longer version of this. The 10 of the greatest personalities of the Mishnah, how they were brutally killed. I think as we go through Kinna 21, to keep in mind that the Arzei Levanon, Adirei Torah, right, the great trees of Torah, were not just living 2,000 years ago during the times of the Mishnah. I want to share with you a more modern day application of Arzei Levanon. 2014, the morning of November 18th, around 7 a.m., during weekday Shachris, in Har Nof and Kilas B'nai Torah, men were gathered together, davening Shemona Esrei. I remember the first time hearing this, we were just finished Shachris here, and Rabbi Wilkach pulled me out. It was before Aleinu. He said, did you hear what happened? Oh. He told me and actually showed me a picture or two. These were pictures we haven't seen since the early 1940s. Men laying there on the ground of a base Knesset with their talesim covered in blood. These are images we haven't seen in 70 years. The more we read about the victims, the more we understood their accomplishments and their personalities. Some were extreme Balei Chesed, others were devoted to Hasmada and learning. One of the victims was Rav Moshe Torsky. Moshe Torsky was one of the Magidei Shir, one of the Ramim of the Yeshiva of Toras Moshe. And I'm friendly personally with many people who were in his shir, who went to his home Friday night, very close with him. So I've heard the name before, but I didn't know really much about him. From his mother's side, he was the grandson of Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, so he had the Brisker blood. And from his father's side, he came from the Tversky Hasidic dynasty. So he was really a combination of different worlds. But more, I think, important than his background was the life that he lived. The way he's described by his Talmidim is that he was like from another world. He was a malach, he was an angel among men. He was a brilliant man, but his Torah clarity was not an expression of his brilliance. It was rather just his toil. Anyone who was within his Dalet Amos saw the schwitzing, the sweating, just trying, no matter what, to understand every step of the Gemara, to present it in a way that people would understand. It was true in his learning, and it was true in his performance of mitzvos. Talmidim said about him that every mitzvah he did it with all of himself. There was a passion, there was a fire, there was a simcha. The late hours he would stay up at night learning, waking up early in the morning, going to the mikveh. These are people that, if you don't have a close connection with them, you almost forget that people like this still exist. These are Arze Levano. The Kli Yakar writes in Chumash that when any Torah personality passes away, the loss to this world, the kedusha that's diminished, that's almost sucked out of Olam Hazeh, is more severe than the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. This really comes from a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Losing one giant in Torah has more of a negative impact on this world and this dimension than the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And during this tragic episode, November 14th, we know the first Israeli police officer, who was a Druze police officer on the scene. He came in, he was alone, and it's obviously a dangerous thing. You have shooting going on, and there's likely more than one person, and in this case there were two. It's somewhat common. You try to get in your position, you make sure you're secure, you try to fire in as much as you can, but to do anything more drastic or more heroic than that is a very dangerous thing. But this young man, his name was Zaiden, he didn't hesitate. And he ran into the scene, he tried to go into the shul, and he was killed while he was doing so. 1 month later, Brad Gonick's sister had a baby. She's married to a man, Alexander Chester. They live in Manhattan. And at the bris, they named him Yaakov Zaiden. The name Zaiden is not a Jewish name, but they named him after this very courageous young man who risked his life for people who are not of his own faith, not of his own religion. But I have a job, I have a responsibility, and they're shooting, and let me do what I can. And the prayer that he gave to his son at the bris was, my prayer to you, Yaakov Zaiden, is that you should strive to do as much for the betterment of the Jewish people and all mankind as Zaiden Saif did in his final moments. May you be inspired by your first namesake to have a tireless commitment to your family and the Jewish people, that's Yaakov, and by your second namesake to be a proud citizen and patriot of your country, and that you be at the forefront of efforts to ensure the peace and safety of all people in Israel and across the world, regardless of whether they share your religious or ethnic identification. So we read Arze Levano, and we mourn not only loss of the great personalities of the Mishnah, but we mourn people throughout the centuries. We mourn Rav Moshe Torsky, and we also mourn people who were heroes, Tzaddik Umas Olam. 248. Go to page 270. '25th Kinnah is known as the Kinnah of the Crusades. It starts off with asking, how is it possible to cry sufficiently? Mi'itein roshi mayim ve'eni makar nozlai ve'evka kol yamosai ve'leilai. Even if I would cry all day and all night, how could I possibly mourn the tragic losses of these Torah communities? The Rambam tells us, we know it from a Gemara and elsewhere, that in order to receive prophecy, one has to be besimcha. The Rambam says, Kol hanaviyim einam misnadim b'chol ha'esh sheyirtzu, ela mechavonim daitam v'yoshvim smeichim v'tuvei leiv. They would need to meditate and get themselves into a trance of simcha and gladness of heart. U'misbodadim she'ena nevuah shora lo mitoch atzvos v'lo mitoch atzlos. Nevuah cannot come in a state of depression or a state of being lethargic. Elam mitoch simcha. I can only gain prophecy when I'm in a state of joy. The Yad HaMelech is a sefer from the Rambam written by the grandson of the Noda B'Yehuda. He's bothered by the question, how is it possible that Yirmiyah was able to receive prophecy? Reading through Eicha, reading through the Sefer Yirmiyah, his whole life was tragic. He was always depressed and mournful for the Jewish state of affairs. So based on the Rambam standard of how to receive prophecy, how is it possible for Yirmiyah to be a prophet? He has an amazing answer. He says it's true that we do find prophets who had shivron leiv, they were broken of heart, ba'atzvus ruach. He says, Ein lecha nevius anocha v'yogon yoser megillas kinos. You don't find any prophecy more despair and tragic than Megillas Kinos, the writings of Yirmiyah. But he says there's a difference in the kind of tears. There's a difference in sadness. Kol ze shayich be'itzavon haba lo le'odem machmas atzmo. The only time it's impossible to receive prophecy is when I'm sad because of my own experience. Masha ein kein hanavim hakadoshim, in contrast to the great prophets, that even as they lived through tragic episodes in Klal Yisrael, af ki libam hayanenach, and of course they were going through that same tsar and anguish as they went through the Churban, as they experienced destruction, but nonetheless, b'chol zeh, hema mitzadin ani atzmam, when it came to themselves, hayumodim u'mevarchim la'bore, they were able to still hold on to a feeling of gratitude to Hashem. They were still able to have a simcha, knowing that I'm doing the right thing, I'm trying my hardest. Whatever Hashem has in mind is well above and beyond my understanding, but I'm trying my hardest. Writes the Yad HaMelech, those kind of tears do not block one from Nevuah. To the contrary, they could enhance the receptivity of Nevuah. Crying for others, deep down, it's almost creating a sense of inner contentment. Because when I'm relating and I'm connecting in an emotional way, even though externally it's sad, there's a level of simcha that's very deep. Rabbi Wallace is well known for starting Arachim. He tells an amazing story about the power of tears. He said his father was named Yehuda Wallace, and he was in Auschwitz. There was one day where a young man was being taken off to be killed, and his father was standing there witnessing the whole thing. And this guy, as he's being dragged by a German, he takes something out of his pocket and he throws it over to Yehuda. And he catches it and he's thinking maybe it's a morsel of bread, maybe it's some food I'll take back with me. So he runs back into his bunker and he takes a look at it, and it's actually a very small pair of tefillin. So he's at first very scared. If he's caught with this, he'll be killed on the spot. You can't have tefillin. So he decides to hide it underneath the platform, and he resolves that, you know what, tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up earlier, and if I have tefillin, I haven't put this on in a long time, I'm going to try it. So he wakes up early, puts on tefillin, but as his luck has it, as he's wearing tefillin, shel yad and shel rosh, one of the SS officers walks in, and he sees him, he catches red-handed. So he says, we're going to have to kill you. Dirty dog, come here. So they take him outside, they put a noose around his neck, and they're about to hang him. And he says, as was the custom, dog, do you have any last wishes? And at this time, the tefillin was off. So he said, I'd like to put the tefillin on one more time. So they acquiesced, they give him the tefillin. Right? You could picture the scene. You're standing there, and the way he describes the story is you have men standing around witnessing this, and there was a whole women's area with barbed wire, and they were also forced to see this as well, to be a lesson to them. Standing there with a noose around his neck, and he starts putting on tefillin. As he's wrapping the shel yad, he's saying the psukim, v'aristichli, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Klal Yisrael, I betroth you with emunah, with chesed. And he has his tefillin, shel yad and shel rosh, and he looks around, and he sees there are people crying. the women are crying and men are crying. And he was so moved by that because he thought there were no more tears. The way he describes his own experience is that I myself was dried up. I couldn't cry anymore, but I saw people were crying and they were crying for a stranger. That almost gave me this infusion of strength. And I cried out, not even thinking, I cried out in Yiddish, "We're the victors! We're winning!" The SS guard who heard him say that was enraged. He says, "You don't deserve to die like this." He takes off the noose. He says, "I'm going to give you a prettier form of death. Come here." And this was known as one of the torturous ways of killing people. He said, "You have to hold these 2 stones. They had 2 stones, very heavy. You have to hold each one under your arms, and I'm going to give you 25 lashes to the head. And if you drop any stone before 25 lashes, then I shoot you in the head." And right before doing this, the guard actually whispers to him, "Just drop it now. Don't put yourself through this." And his basic response was, it was the Yiddish way of saying, "Bring it on." So he had there the 2 stones. He was able to withstand something that most people would not be able to. He received 25 lashes to the head. At that point, he fell unconscious. It was assumed he was dead. They kicked him over to a pile of other corpses. He wasn't dead. Another Jew saw that there was still some life in him. He quickly wrapped up his head, trying to maintain the bleeding, and he hit him. He pushed him off to the side. 2 months later, he was liberated. A young lady, 17 years old, walks over to Yehuda Lawless and says, I saw what you did. Will you marry me? I've lost everything, but I saw your bitachon and I saw your strength. At that point, they went to the Klausner Rebbe, and he was Masader Kedushin. The whole invention, the whole creation of Arachim, I was zochet to be part of this past year and give a couple of lectures for. It's based on the offspring of this one man, Yehuda Wallace, having the courage, having the bitachon, but more than anything, being moved by the tears of others. So we read about tears, we don't have enough of them, but to realize the tears we shed for others could actually bring a source of inner simcha and depth. At the same time, they have a power we can never imagine. Page 270. We're going to continue on page 305, the 31st Kinnah. And here we have a contrast. B'tzeisim in Mitzrayim, B'tzeisim in Yerushalayim, the joy and the exuberance and the excitement we felt when we left Mitzrayim versus the despair and the depression we felt when we left Yerushalayim. I'd like to share with you an interesting story from a Gemara in Ksubis, which I think will help put this kin in perspective. This is source number 29 at the bottom of 13. Gemara speaks about the daughter of Nakdimon ben Gurion. That's a name we're familiar with from the Gemara in Gittin. That Ben Gurion, Nakdimon ben Gurion, was a very, very wealthy family in Yerushalayim. Gemara says that one day, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was riding his donkey out of Yerushalayim, and his students were following behind him and asking him questions to learn from him. And he saw a certain young lady who was gathering barley from among the dung of the animals of the Arabs. It's a shocking scene. When she sees him, Amra lo, Rabbi Parnaseni. She said, Rabbi, feed me, help me, do something for me. So he says, who are you? She says, I'm the daughter of Nakdimon ben Gurion. And Yochanan ben Zakkai was surprised. How is it possible that you're sitting on the floor trying to derive barley from the dung of an animal? What happened? She said that we lost everything. Amralo, Rebbe, Zacharata, Kishachamasta al Kasubasi. Rebbe, do you remember you signed in my Ksuba? You took responsibility for me in a sense. he turns to his Talmidim and he says, Zechorani, Shechsamati Ksuba Shalzu. I do remember signing her Ksuba. And I remember how much money was in that Ksuba. I recall the extravagant wealth of the families. At that point, Bachar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he began to cry. And he said, Ashreichem Yisrael, fortunate are the Jewish people, that Bizman she'osin ritzona shel makom, ein kol umma v'lashon sholetis behem. When we're doing the will of Hashem, then no nation has control over us. No one can touch us. Ubizman she'ein osin ritzona shel makom. But when we're not obeying the Ratzon Hashem, then Mosrin biyad umma shfeila, we're given into the hands of a lowly nation. V'lo biyad umma shfeila, ela biyad behemoson shel umma shfeila. Even lower than that, we're given into the hands of the animals of a lowly nation. Ashreichem Yisrael. So the Mashal points out, it sounds like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying, you are fortunate, Klal Yisrael, for both extremes. You're fortunate that when you're doing Ritzono Shel Makom, nobody can touch you. But says the Marsha, you're also fortunate that when we're not doing Ritzono Shel Makom, when we're deviating, then we'll be in a very lowly place. Ashreichem Yisrael in both situations. Marsha says, because Klal Yisrael is in a whole different reality than any other nation. Other nations, there's a mazel, there's a sar, there's some kind of blockage between them and a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and there's some distance. There's some space between the Borei Olam and other nations. When it comes to the Am HaNivchar, when it comes to Klal Yisrael, there's no space. It's always me and you. When you're doing Ratzono Shel Makom, then things are beautiful. And when we're deviating, so then things are not beautiful. But it's always beautiful because Ashreichem Yisrael, it's always HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the theme of this kinna is, whether or not it's B'Tzeisim and Mitzrayim, where we see the Yad Hashem and we see the glory and the grandeur and the chesed of Hashem, we could say thank you. The goal is even B'Tzeisim Yerushalayim, during those darker moments in life, the realization of Ashreichem Yisrael, that we're never alone, we're always under the sheltering wings and the guidance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Page 304. Going to Kinna number 36 on page 329. The famous Kinna expressing his love for Eretz Yisrael. It's composed by Yehuda Halevi, one of the early Rishonim. Libi lebeis kel, my heart is in the house of God, referring to Eretz Yisrael, and I yearn for it immensely. Page 15, I have a letter written by Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, former chief rabbi of Israel. And he speaks about the first time he heard the words Eretz Yisrael. Read a couple of lines together. Hapam Rishona Shani Shamati Es Milim Eretz Yisrael. First time I heard that phrase, Hayisi v'Yosi ben Sheva, I was 7 years old, the last year of the war. He explains the setting. I found myself in a crowd of people, and Pisum Shamati me also Kivin Kol HaKorish Mi. I heard a voice that sounded somewhat familiar, and it was calling my name. Lulak, Lulak. So I realized that was Kolel Shel Achi, Naftali. That was the voice of my brother, Naftali. He was 18 years old, and when I saw him, Nira Nora, the Kosha Hayla Hakira, it was so hard to recognize him. He was a skeleton of a human being. But he said, Lulak. That was the nickname, the Polish nickname for Yisrael. He said, Ata Yelid Gadol, you're already an older child. Ani lo astem mipanecha asa emes, I can't hide from you the truth, and Naftali said to his younger brother, Ata yodea she'ein lanu abba, you know that we no longer have a father. Ukenira shegam einu lanu ima. And it definitely appears we no longer have a mother either. Ani lo mamin shemashu yotza megehenim hazeh. I don't really believe we'll be getting out of this hell. Aval im yikra nes. If a miracle does happen, hagehenim yigamer, and somehow this hell stops, v'ata tishar chai, and you're still alive after the war, tizkor, you should remember sheyesh makom echad ba'olam. There's one place in the world, shekorim lo Eretz Yisrael. They call it Eretz Yisrael. Tagid shata rotzeh lahagia l'sham. All you have to know is that you have to tell people that's where you want to go. Not to America, not to Europe. You want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Sheyikhu ozcha l'sham, zeh hamakom shelanu. You should know this is our place. This is our land. And he went on to say, Naphtali told his brother, little Yisrael, Sham lo horgim Yehudim. There they don't kill Jews. There in Eretz Yisrael, that's where our uncle David was able to escape to. We're going to reunite with the family, living amongst our brothers and sisters. Zeh hamakom shelanu. So Rabbi Lau writes, Ani choshev hayom al hamilim shachi Naphtali sheyichya amrli. I think about the words that he told me so many decades ago. And my heart pounds and I feel, Baruch Hashem, Zekinu, Shaninu, La'alos, La'eretz Yisrael. We were able to make Aliyah and live in Eretz Yisrael. Ach dover echad midavar v'adayin lo hiskashem. But there's one thing he said that did not yet come to fruition. Hu tir as Eretz Yisrael kamakom. His description of Eretz Yisrael as a land, shesham lo horgim Yehudim. That there they do not kill Jews. That has yet to be fulfilled. Ani tefillah, and therefore his prayer, the prayer of the chief rabbi, shenizke lekabet es kol acheinu lemedinas Yisrael. We daven that we should all, brothers and sisters, go together to Eretz Yisrael, le'eretz ha'avos, the land of our fathers, v'nizke lichios b'medinas ha'yehudim k'yehudim. And we daven that we should live in the land of Jews like Jews. Asher yodim shebeisa knesses u'lev umah. Jews that understand the heart of the nation is the shul, is the Beis Medrash. V'toras Yisrael hi hagarim ha'ma'ached. The Torah, the spiritual reality of Eretz Yisrael has this mystical force of being meyached, of bonding all of us together. We read the Kinah 36, and we not only long for Mashiach, but we long for Eretz Yisrael, living b'makom shalanu as Jews. On page 328. We're doing Kinna 41 on page 361. Here the author of the Kinna speaks about the Maram of Rothenburg. Many of us are familiar with his story of being held captive. And there was a whole discussion as to whether or not they should try to ransom him. On one hand, the Maram himself said that I don't encourage the Jewish community to raise money to save me. I think it's it'll cause more damage and danger in the future. However, his disciple, the Rosh, the Rebbeinu Asher, he felt otherwise. He thought halachically and hashkafically it was really his mandate to try to free his Rebbe. Goes back to the famous discussion in the Gemara in Gittin. The Mishnah tells us, "Ein poden eser shavuyin yeser al kadei demehen." We do not free captives more than their value. That's a discussion we're not going to have time to delve into now. But the reason given is mipnei tikkun ha'olam, for the benefit of society. And the Gemara has a whole lengthy explanation what tikkun ha'olam means. However, the question that many are bothered by is that later on in Gittin and Daf Nun Ches, it has the story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. He goes to a big city in Rome, and he sees a young child in the Beis Asurim in jail. And he starts speaking with him a little bit, and he realizes that he has a lot of potential to be a real Talmid Chacham. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya says, Muftachani bo shemor harabi Yisrael. I promise you this young man will be a great teacher in Klal Yisrael. And therefore, ha'avoda, I swear, she'eni zoz mikan, ad she'efdenu b'chol mamun sheposken alav. I will not move from this jail here in Rome until we're able to free this young kid, no matter how much they're asking. So all of the Rishonim are bothered by the question, how does that fit with the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, Ein podem eser shvuim yeser kadei demehen. You can't free captives. They're asking a lot of money. So the Rosh in his commentary explains that we have exceptions. One of the exceptions to not overpaying to get back someone from captivity is the Talmid Chacham Shenishba. If he's one of the great teachers in Klal Yisrael that's been taken captive, we need him. Our lives are dependent on him. And the proof, he says, is this case of this small kid. The Gemara tells us that eventually Rabbi Yeshua was able to raise the funds and he freed this child, And who did he become? Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. He became a wonderful Torah scholar. So says the Rush, if you're able to overpay for a child who only has potential to be great one day, then of course you're mechuyev, you're obligated to get as much money as they're asking to get the Maram out of jail. He's the Gadol Hador. We turn to him for everything. September 6, 1970, the infamous TWA flight 741 from Israel returning to New York. And this hits home because Mr. Fried, who's here with us today, his wife was on that flight. Rav Hutner was on that flight as well, together with his son-in-law, Rav Yonason. And they landed the planes. They first let all the non-Jewish people go, and they only held captive the Jews. Eventually, they let the women and children go, but they had the men. And Baruch Hashem, we know they made it out alive, but not unscathed. The students of Rav Hutner say that when they first saw their Rebbe after this whole episode, he looked like he aged decades. He lost more than 40 pounds in this experience. The story goes that when the terrorists realized that Rav Hutner was a very prestigious rabbi, one of them actually offered him a can of Coke. He said, "Big rabbi, so would you like a Coke?" And Rav Hutner said back, "I don't know if it's true, but it's definitely something he could and should have said." He said, "I only have my soda with ice." He denied it. But I think one message to take from Kinnah 41 is that the Talmidei Chachamim, the leaders of the generation, the people that we turn to, not just for guidance and halachic issues, but kiheim chayenu v'orach yameinu, they're our life, and therefore we do everything we possibly can to gain and to grow from them. Page 360. We continue on page 385. Speaking to Rabbi Coulter this past week, he told me that when he was in Ari Crown in Chicago, it's the elementary school there, they set up a computer to count 6 million with 3 counts per second. And they did this as a program in the school to give the children just a little bit of a concept of what 6 million is. He told me that 3 weeks later, when it finally got to 6 million, the secretary ran out of the office crying. 3 weeks later, after counting 3 people per second. It's impossible to have a veilus over the Churban, over the destruction of Europe. It's something that's so unfathomable. And it's not just 6 million. There are millions and millions and millions of people whose lives they were able to make it out alive, but psychologically and physically never the same. I'm zocha to know someone, a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor. Visited him this past week with Mr. Kramer. And they were never able to have children because his wife went through medical experiments, and he himself is living in agony throughout decades, not just the psychological trauma, but being beaten so many times and so aggressively, such barbarism. It's so much more than 6 million people. It's all their survivors. It's all the second generation. It's all the third generation. There's no way to have any perception of that churban, of that devastation. And I think sometimes the only way to relate to a tragedy of that magnitude is by focusing on yechidim, looking at individuals, looking at one person, one experience. There's really a profound story about the Panovich Rav, Kahneman. He lost most of his family in the war, but he was able to survive with one of his sons, his son Avram. And he moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he wanted to create Panovich in Eretz Yisrael. The first thing he did, though, is he built something called Batei Avos. Batei Avos was an institution for orphans, for children who made their way to Eretz Yisrael, whose parents were killed in the Holocaust. And a couple years into that, he had the Batei Avos, the orphanage, and he also had Panovich Yeshiva, which was now gaining traction. And his son Avram was really in charge of some of the mechanics and the finances of the yeshiva. And his son approached the father, the Panovich Rav, and said, Tati, we're not able to do this. The financial burden of both of these institutions, it's too much to bear. You have to really choose. You either close down Batei Avos, or you close down the yeshiva, but we can't support them both. At this time, there were 90 children in Batei Avos, and there were about 120 Bachrim learning in the yeshiva in Panovich. Panovich Rav turned to his son and said, Avramala, after the Holocaust, when Europe was destroyed, Poland, Litva, Hungary, Galicia, so Choshev li ma'od livnos od yeshiva, you know that I wanted to build a yeshiva, a place of Torah. That's always been my dream, to somehow rebuild Panovich in Eretz Yisrael, not to allow that Torah to burn up in the smoke of Europe. But what can I do? My Rebbe, Chafetz Chaim, told me, he gave me clear instructions. He said, I know your vision, and I know you want to build Torah, but I want to tell you something. Torah bli chesed, Torah without chesed, without consideration for others, lo yeh lakim, it will not be able to sustain. You want a yeshiva, said the Chafetz Chaim to the Panovich Rav, then you have to do chesed. So he said to his son, we're not closing Batei Avos. There is a little boy who was brought to Batei Avos when he was 6 or 7 years old, lost both of his parents in Auschwitz, and for some reason, he would refuse to get undressed and take a shower. His clothes were filthy, grimy, his whole body was filled with dirt. And the Geveret, the mother of the house, who was really on top of the children, she would try to convince him. He arrives on Wednesday, Thursday, nothing. Friday before Shabbos, trying to get him, it's covered Shabbos. B'shum ofen, no matter what she would say, he refused to take off his clothing and take a shower. It went through Shabbos, and it was now 6 or 7 days, and it was unbearable. It wasn't healthy for the child, it wasn't healthy for the environment. So she calls in the Panovich Rav, maybe he could do something, maybe he could say something to this young boy. And he starts, trying to convince him, it's a mitzvah to clean yourself. It's a way of honoring Hashem. Closed as a book. He didn't say why, didn't explain his reasons, but I'm not taking a shower. Panovich Rav himself, and this is way before we understood this psychologically, he knew that these young children needed physical affection. So obviously the Geveret, the lady of the house, was there for the girls, and the Panovich Rav himself, with his hectic schedule of building a yeshiva and maintaining financially both institutions and traveling around the world, he made it his business that he would always come and give hugs and kisses to the boys and also distribute candy before Shabbos. But even with his warmth and his love and his connection, he couldn't convince this kid, little Mordechai. He couldn't convince Mordechai to take a shower. Eventually, they brought him to the Chazon Ish. So they explained the story to the Chazon Ish, and the boy is still not saying anything, keeping his mouth shut. Chazon Ish says, why won't you just give your clothing to the Geveret and take a bath? And the boy finally opens up. He says, I've taken off clothing too many times and it's never been returned, and I don't trust anybody. I'm not taking off anything. If I take it off, I'm not getting it back. And she says, the Geveret, I promise, I'm going to wash it for you and make it nice. I don't trust you, he said to her face. Panovich Rav said, I'll be in charge of it, I'll take care of it. The boy said, I don't trust you. So the Chazon Ish, he had the advantage of being renowned as the Gadol Hador. He turns to little Mordechai, 7-year-old boy, and says, I promise you, I will watch your clothing. It'll be a pikadon, I'll be your shomer. I'll wash it for you carefully to make sure nothing happens, that no one's going to take it. I'm going to watch it for you. So he eventually agrees to give it to the Chazon Ish. He goes back with the Geveret, he takes a bath. And now the Chazon Ish and the Panovich Rav are left alone with this dirty, disgusting clothing. And there were many people that could have washed the clothes besides the Chazon Ish and the Panovich Rav. But the Chazon Ish, who didn't waste a second of time for anything inconsequential, he gets the bucket, he fills it up with water, he puts some soap in it, and he rolls up, he takes off his coat, he starts rolling up his sleeves. As an older man, he starts wringing it out, and the Panovich Rav starts joining in together. And they mamish spend, and this story has been verified. This comes from the most authentic sources you could possibly imagine. They spend 25 minutes together washing little Mordechai's clothing. And they look at each other as they're there getting their selves dirty. The Chazon Ish said to the Panovich Rav, you know that we have to be his parents. We have to be his Abba and Ima. He comes back and he sees all of his clothing, his tzitzis and his pants. Chazon Ish hang them up outside to dry. He came back clean in his pajamas, and they said that was the turning point in his life. That was the beginning of developing some relationship with the foundation of trust. It took many, many years. This young man was able to learn as an Avrech in the Kollel of the Chazon Ish. Married, he has 11 children, just recently, he had grandchildren. But it's not just the people who were murdered in the Holocaust. It's so many other people with so much trauma. And the realization that we have to have a sense of achrayus for anybody going through any tzara. If they don't have a mother and father, or they don't have the mother and father they need right now to take care of them, then we have to roll up our sleeves. The Chazon Ish was able to devote his life to being this kid's father. The Panovich Rav was able to devote his life to being this kid's mother. We should be zocha to Yeshuos and the Chamos. We should be zocha to have a sense of responsibility for Klal Yisrael on page 384.
Shared on